Hello everybody and welcome back to Adventures with Sarah's Explorations of Florence today. For those of you who are new to Adventures with Sarah, I've been a tour guide for 20 years and I am here in one of my favorite cities, and today we're just doing a little bit of exploration and a mini virtual tour. So for those of you who are new, if you are interested in supporting my work, you can join my Patreon. It's Adventures with Sarah and also virtual tip jar if you wish. But obviously, I always want to keep all information and learning free for everybody to enjoy. So please sit back and relax. We're going to get to learning a little bit about the city of Florence and the history of Florence. So thanks for joining me. If you saw the first part, we're going to continue on from a little bit different perspective now, because what I'd like to talk about now is city evolution. And this is a little lesson I think you can take with you to many, many places throughout Europe. First of all, this city's on a river. And why is this city on a river? In the past, if you go back to the time of the Etruscans were the first people that lived here in Tuscany. That's why it's called Tuscany. So when I speak about the Etruscans, I'm talking about pre-Roman people. So let's go back to 400 BC, maybe even before. These are here, and they had a very unusual culture. But they founded their cities in places that were smart for ancient people. They founded them up on hillsides, on top of hills, because you can control what's coming around you, but also in this part of Italy, it's hot. And so you want to be up where you get the breeze. So the Etruscans were very smart. Also, lots of mosquitoes, and you want to stay away from the mosquitoes, the malaria that they create, the bad air. So the ancient Etruscans were smart. They settled up in Fiesole, which is up above the city of Florence. Then the Romans come. The Romans arrive here and they want to subjugate the Etruscans, and they also want to build their roads. And what's the most important part of building their road network? We talked about this the other day, the Pontifex Maximus. It's building bridges. So they came to the Arno River, they built a bridge, and that bridge, the Ponte Vecchio, there's a soccer game. The Ponte Vecchio, the old bridge, was the bridge that was built, originally, even in Roman times. That was one of the earliest bridges. The Romans settled here, not as a city, but a military camp to control the crossing of the River Arno, because if you control that, you control all the transportation and trade. And in doing this, they were able to sort of subjugate the Etruscans who lived up above, because they were traders. They grew wine and they traded that wine all over the place, but they needed to get to the river to get their product out to France, for instance. The Etruscans were known to trade with even as far away as France. So they choked those people economically by building these roads. So this city begins as a Roman city, but not a proper Roman city. It's a military camp, and that's why a big portion of this city is called Campo Marso, the Field of Mars. And that's because that field, Mars is the god of war, and that's every time you have a Roman city, the military camp, even in Pompeii, I think there's a Field of Mars. So that was always the place where you had the military camp. So this was a military camp originally for the Roman soldiers. Over time, this becomes the city. The city grows up over time and becomes a very typical central Italian city-state. Okay, so when Rome falls apart, each of these little places that have been started by the Romans, big cities, small cities, they turn into their own countries. They build their own walls, and when the invaders come from the north in the 5th, 6th, and 7th centuries, people from the countryside, it's not safe to live there. You can work your fields during the day, but then you better get inside the walls of a city at night in case there are invaders. And that's how cities like Florence develop, cities like Volterra would be another one. You can think about Ferrara, any of these cities in Italy with big walls. That's how it functioned. People would work outside during the day, live inside in the protection of the walls. There was no centralized government, so the cities were run by the people, by the oligarchy, the wealthy families of the city. And so each of these little cities became a country. So, thinking about that, you need to cram an awful lot of people into a city if it's a country, if it's a state. So what was the life like if we go back to the 11 and 1200s? Well, I'm going to show you a typical house. This is a typical tower house. This is the Torre di Bondelmonte, and you can see it's a pretty basic structure. Now, how it worked was, here on the bottom, this was the shop, because remember, Florentines were merchants and they would trade their goods here, right? So this was the shop. Up over the shop, you would have a room, and that's where the original family would live. So most of these people would start in their room. You can see these holes here in the walls. above as well with the plinths underneath those. So what those were usually for is that they would build out awnings for the shop, but also up above they would build out outdoor space like a balcony. So you have to imagine these tower houses had outdoor space as well. But look at that, your house would be one room. Now of course there was no bathroom at that time, so you know you'd toss the toilet water out the window. But over time, as families grew, they would just build up. You know, your son gets married, you build up. There's more kids in the family, you build up. And they would build up and up and up until they had these tower houses that were huge. They could be 7, 8, 9, 10 stories tall. Unreinforced masonry. If you're an architect, what that means is basically stones with mortar in between them, but nothing else holding them together. Not what I would call the most stable way to build super skyscrapers, but if you take a look at how tall this is, imagine this going up another couple of floors and then project that around the entire city of Florence. So in your mind, what you should be seeing now is a city that looks like Manhattan. Tower houses. Now, the thing about the tower houses is that tower houses were effective for a couple different reasons. Number one, taxes were paid based on the square footage of the footprint of your house. So people would have a small footprint, they build up, and they build out. They build balconies and other kinds of outdoor spaces to be able to minimize the footprint but maximize the square footage. So that was number one. You know, medieval zoning codes were not the best. The other thing, though, is that people who live in cities like this would compete to have the tallest tower. And so if your neighbor had a new floor put on, you would then thereby need to put a new floor on your house. So keeping up with the Giovannis, you know, it's like you have to always look good. It's the bella figura. So it became a race. And the families would try to build up higher and higher. If you've ever been to the city of San Gimignano, you know this story completely because all of those towers, it was a similar story all throughout Tuscany. So when we look at the tower houses around here, you have to imagine every city looked like a little miniature Manhattan. So the Torre di Bondomonti, now what I want to show you is that this was built in 1100s, and over time this becomes a little restrictive, and as the merchants of Florence make more and more money, they're going to want to do something different. So come down here and I'll show you. What they're going to do is, you know, if you can't build up any further, and at a certain point, the government said, okay, no more floors. You all have to chop your towers down to the same height. And now in the city of Florence, there aren't any that are exceptionally high. That's why you probably have never noticed them if you've been here. But they also became too dangerous. But what happens is, later on, they do what I call the double wide. You know, let's have a look at the double wide. So this person had a tower house, right? And then they got a little extra money, so they joined it to the tower house next to them. So now they got a double wide, right? They've got two tower houses joined into one. So that's the next phase of Florentine city development, is that people put tower houses together, and now they have twice the space, which is great. You know, so as these people continue to make more and more money, that's how they're going to be more elegant. You know, you can't go up anymore. The city said no more of that, so they go double wide. By the way, before we leave the street, Trattoria Nella, that is one of my favorite restaurants. They have the best gnocchi that I've ever had. So great place to stop if you happen to be in Florence. So now I'm going to take you on a little stroll over to the next phase. But while we do, a few more little details. Here's the Old Stove, which is a very popular Irish bar. I have whiled away many hours with my Rick Steves colleagues in this pub. This is a funny little square, though, because these buildings are used by the Calcio Storico. So that's a historic soccer game. It's an organization that every year organizes a historic soccer game. I know that sounds crazy, but you've heard of the Palio, I think, right? So if you've heard of the Palio, that's the horse race that takes place. Every city has something like that, though. The Palio is not unique in that way. So here we go. The Calcio Storico Fiorentino. So their medieval festival here, or Renaissance festival, whatever you want to say, is their historic reenactment festival, is a soccer game. It takes place on my birthday. It's for their patron saint, St. John the Baptist. I like to think it's for my birthday. But they have it in June, and they set up Piazza Santa Croce with stands. And then the guys, it's a man from each district. They put together teams based on the districts of Florence. and they go out and they play soccer in Renaissance costumes, which is a scream. But the thing is, the people here, the locals, take it super seriously. It's like life and death, who's going to win. But it's also more like rugby than soccer, because they beat the bejesus out of each other. And I think it was 2 or 3 years ago, I was here for the Calcio Storico, and they stopped it in the middle of the match. They canceled the rest of it because too many people were getting injured because they just beat the crap out of each other. So it's a bizarre, I don't want to say it's bizarre, I'm not going to mention it. It's a very interesting tradition that they have here, the Calcio Storico. That takes place every June. So they love their traditions here. So I'm going to take you down now this way. We're near the Ponte Vecchio area, and this is one of the most colorful and characteristic areas because it's still kind of somewhat original. So the building, this is actually a good place to look at it, is this one here. It's called Palazzo Davansati. You might have been in here if you've been on a Rick Steves tour. If you've been with me on a tour, you definitely have, because it's one of my favorite buildings. This is what happens next. So you go from the double wide. Now the merchants are getting more bold and they have more money, but they also want to turn their house into their fortress, so they don't have to leave. So what they do is create a courtyard in the middle, and they create sort of a donut-shaped building. So this is a big block, maybe, from the outside, but on the inside, there's a big open space. So they don't ever have to leave their house. Now they have light and fresh air. And you have to do that. So think about that. Without modern electricity, ventilation, things like that, you can't make a square building much bigger. At a certain point, there's a limit because you don't get air, you don't get light. So people need to create light and air in the center of the building if you want to have a bigger footprint, right? So this is why buildings start to develop in this way. I call it the square donut theory. So you make the building like this, and in the middle is an open courtyard, open to the sky. In this way, these buildings were able to collect rainwater, for one thing, so in a cistern. So these buildings, they could be like a fortress. And you have to imagine that each of the families here, they kind of fought, and they would battle against each other. So truly, their home was also a fortress. But also, a little detail from Florentine buildings is on the very top. They always had an altana. So this is just an outdoor porch on the top of the building. And in Florence, this is very important because Florence is in a sort of a depression, and air passes over the top of the city and it gets very stuffy. So if you were an elegant family and you could put an altana up there, what that created was air conditioning. So imagine the air flowing in here like this and then going down that chute. And that would create sort of a medieval sense of ventilation. So super, super clever, and it worked. So that is very typical on every Florentine building, to have that altana that then provides ventilation. As we get closer, just some thoughts, stories that I think are delightful. You see the bars going across the front of the building here, right? So those were probably for hanging out, banners, because a lot of these people were in the wool trade, so they wanted to show their wares, the standard of the family. But there's also stories of how these bars and these hooks would be used to display animal cages. I know that sounds weird, but back in the Renaissance in particular, these wealthy families, a way to show your wealth was to have a menagerie, to have weird exotic animals. So if you can imagine on the bar up there, think about like a cage with an exotic bird in it, a monkey running around. This was just yet another way for people to see how elegant your family was. But don't look at it as just a boring brick facade. Imagine it draped with colorful wools or silks or things like this. So that the buildings would have been much more colorful looking in the past, because they definitely wanted to communicate that they were wealthy. They're nouveau riche. The people who live here are nouveau riche, and always the impetus of the nouveau riche is to prove how wealthy they are. So across the way, we have another example of a tower house that got a double wide attached to it. Okay, so tower houses everywhere. Every Florentine building that's old has this at its base, is a tower house. And it's a dead giveaway when you look, especially on the front. You can see these holes. Imagine balconies. So there would have been balconies all the way up this building. I know this is true for one reason. I've seen it. If you go to the town of Arezzo, which is a lovely town in the countryside south of Florence, the buildings there still have the balconies on them, and there's lots of them. So you go and you can really have, in some of these smaller towns, a sensation of the past. The rest of this district here, a lot of it has been torn down and remodeled because we're very close to Piazza della Repubblica. This zone used to be the Jewish ghetto, and it was an ancient market. And during the unification of Italy in the 1870s, here's a little tidbit. This is for your Jeopardy, the day you're on Jeopardy. Florence was the first capital of Italy. So Florence was the place where you would, I mean, it was the central part, the beating heart of Italy. But the problem is that Florence was not really, let's say, modernized enough to be the capital of a new country. So they had to spend a lot of money modernizing and changing things around. So they tore down vast swaths of the city. And that's actually what's so neat about Palazzo Davansati. That was one of the few buildings that was saved. At the turn of the century, it was decrepit and falling apart, but an antiques dealer loved it so much he bought it and he saved it for us, which is very fortunate. A lot of other pieces of this neighborhood, though, don't exist anymore. They look old, but they're not. They're like 19th century buildings. Like this is the movie theater, which when we talk about it being 1800s, that's like built yesterday by Italian standards. So we lost a lot of that because they tore down this neighborhood. They moved the Jewish community out to a new zone where they built a really beautiful new synagogue out there. And then instead, in its place, they built Piazza della Repubblica, which that's the colonnade from there. So let's stroll up here. This is my favorite movie theater. I've seen many English language movies here. So it's sort of a fond place for me. Looks like they do have their theaters open, and I know that in Rome, the opera's open. I'm considering going to the ballet in a couple of days because it's open. And then we have, it looks like a little jewelry market here, but this is the building I came to show you. If it's open, the door's open, hopefully I'll be able to sneak a peek inside for you. So, just to review, we started with the tower house, right? Then we went to the double wide. Then we went to the rough square donut kind of plan that was a little wonky, but it was a patchwork quilt way to create a better living space. Now if we skip forward to the solid Renaissance, when I speak about the 1400s. Now the Davanzati, we're thinking the 1300s. The tower house was more the 1100s, 1200s. So if we skip forward to the 1400s, going into the 1500s, that's when people here have serious money. Not just money, serious money. When they have serious money, they're going to design something. It's not going to be piecemeal patchwork quilt kind of style. They're going to hire an architect, and they're going to do something better. Their square donut is going to be the best square donut. And so Palazzo Strozzi, I think, is one of the most beautiful examples of that. And this is a building you're going to see everywhere, typical Florentine palazzo style. So if you kind of read it with me, you have the lower level. The lower level has a bench, and that bench is not for lovers who are snuggling, but I guess they could also be. But that was typically meant to be the place where you would step off your horse, because remember, people were a lot shorter than we are in the past. Nobody was my height in the past. So they needed that bench to step off their horse, and you can tell that because there's the ring above where they would tie their horse and the holder for their torches. So if you got an evening visitor, that's where you stop. It's the reception area. And so the upper windows here, typically on this floor, you can see they have bars on them. This would have been the business end of the house. So they would have had offices for their business on that floor. The next floor up is the piano nobile, the noble floor. And that's going to be reception rooms and the most beautiful rooms of the house. The floor above is typically going to be living quarters for the family. And if there's a floor above that, which there might even be hidden, that is where the service people live, the servants. So that's how you read a building like this. It's very similar in Venice, kind of a similar style. I'll show you that tomorrow. So that's how you read it. But what's beautiful about this is look at the order, look at the structure. This looks like this was drawn on grid paper. And when you compare it to all the other wonky stuff we've seen, that's what the departure is. This is where things get so much better because somebody's thinking it through first. And it's organized and it's harmonious and geometric. Now, if you look on the bottom, they have rusticated stone, so that's the kind of it's sticking out. But read it with me. It gets a little lighter here. You can see the definition between the stones, but it's much lighter. And then at the top, it's airy. You can really not see the definition between the stones because they want to give you a sense of light as you approach the top. On the very top, you can see that they're stealing ideas from the Romans, because the Renaissance is always the rebirth of Roman knowledge, classical knowledge, and they're copying dentils and Eigendardt decoration that's found on typical Roman monuments. So it's kind of a conglomeration of ideas, right? It's the old and the new coming together. So I'm going to take you over and we're going to see if we can actually get into Palazzo Strozzi. Sometimes it's open and I do hope it is. Let's pop in. It is thumping tonight. I don't even know what day of the week it is. What is it, Friday? No, Saturday. Yeah, so Saturday is another thing around here. A very popular day of the week. This is fun. This is like a little artisan craft fair. I'd heard that this was happening. Ooh, I like that. Ooh, maybe I need to buy myself a scarf. No. I don't need to buy myself a scarf. It's a pandemic. No scarves for me. Fun little artisan kind of shops, different things that they make. And it looks like we are allowed to go into Palazzo Strozzi. Yeah! All right, so let's go learn about Renaissance art inside Palazzo Strozzi. I'm going to put on my mask, so just give me a second here. And look at this crazy piece of art here. Now, Palazzo Strozzi has become well known lately for being a place where they do modern art exhibitions. And they're trying to reuse it in different ways so that they can always make sure that these buildings have life. So that's what we have here now is a modern art exhibition. Last year or the year before, I think it was, they filled this whole lobby, this open space, with a slide. And you could slide down it like a big, huge slide from a playground. But this is our art exhibition today. Okay, so now we're in the Square Donut. We're in the center. So this is the courtyard where the people of the family would have lived and received you. So let's say you're a visitor. You're coming in, you'd walk in the door, you'd meet with the owner. This is the offices of the owner. If you needed to go upstairs and do business, there would be the stairwell to do that. The stairwell down on the other side would have taken you up to the primo piano, the piano nobile up there with those big windows. You can see that that's obviously the entertainment level. And then above that, you can see an altana, but their altana is on the inside because having it on the outside would definitely mess up that beautiful symmetry and harmony. So again, it's all about light, it's about air conditioning. And when you think about it, if you lived here, you wouldn't need to leave, would you? You could stay here because you could have your light, your air. If you were a fine lady, imagine yourself in a silk dress pacing around this courtyard. This was elegant, good living. And beyond that, if we want to just talk about what is the basic idea of Renaissance architecture, it is order, it is symmetry, it is geometry. Because starting with the time of Brunelleschi, that's when they start to pay attention to perspective and ratios. And there's a thing called the golden section, which you probably have heard of. If you've ever seen The Vitruvian Man by Da Vinci, that's one of those ideas. Measurements, people were taking measurements and trying to figure out, in nature, there are measurements that are just spontaneously the same. And that's the golden section. The golden section, if you think of it, it's a nautilus shell, that's another graph of it. Somebody took that and diagrammed it and found out, actually, there's a ratio there. It's something like 1.3, something like that. And that ratio occurs in your body, and that occurs in the natural world. And why this is important, the mathematics of organic growth, is that it appeals to you. You like it whether you know it or not. You want order. People love order. There was a study done some years ago, I remember reading about how they measured people's faces by showing photographs to babies, and they saw the reaction. And if the babies liked the face, smiled or reacted, that was considered a beautiful face. So what is beauty? At the bottom of the line, what they figured out was the same thing that the artists in the Renaissance figured out. What is beauty is symmetry. It's things being in the right proportion. And I'm telling you this for an important reason, because when you look around this palazzo, everything here has that proportion. So the height of the columns, the ratio of the columns, the size of the arches, all of these things adhere to that proportion that you naturally want to like. Whether you want it, you know it or not, you are programmed to like that ratio. And that is the numbers game that Renaissance art is playing with in architecture. They're always playing with geometry, they're playing with relating to the human scale. And that's why when you come to Italy, you like Italy. I'm sorry, but y'all like Italy. I know you like Italy, and I love Italy. And why? It's because these cities were built for us. They were built for our human bodies. They were not built for cars. They were not built for, you know, jamming as many offices into a space as they can. And that's why you will always feel defeated in a big city with skyscrapers, because it makes you feel small. You will never feel that way when you walk around Florence, when you walk around Venice, because these cities were built for your body. They're built to fit you. It's sort of the difference between wearing a finely tailored piece of clothing or wearing something baggy and ill-fitting. You know, you're always going to feel more comfortable in something built for you. And that's why Italian cities feel as beautiful and welcoming as they do. It's built for your body, for your human scale. So Palazzo Strozzi is definitely built using these ratios. You can also tell that they are stripping back on colors and they're keeping it gray and white. And this is a really typical sort of color scheme here that's typical of Florentine art. Okay. Please, if you guys have questions, I'm happy to answer. So I think what I want to do now, if you guys want to stick with me, I'm going to go get myself a steak after this. So I got probably another 15 minutes in me before it's time to go and find myself a bistecca fiorentina. But I do want to take you for a little bit more of a stroll here along our Renaissance walk. And I want to show you the things you're excited to see. So I want to show you the Duomo. But first, if you don't mind sticking with me for a minute, I would love to take you to see the Or San Michele, and we can talk a little bit about my Renaissance crush, Donatello. So I'm going to go ahead and give you guys a little break here, and I'm going to come back in just a few minutes for our third and final segment, and that's going to be walking from the Or San Michele to the Duomo, and I'm going to show you a little bit about the architecture and the art of the heart of Florence around Via Calzaioli. Okay, so back at you in about, let's take 5, go get yourself another cup of coffee or pop some popcorn if you like, and walk along with me. We're bringing you the sensation of travel here, virtual travel, free virtual tour here on Adventures with Sarah through the city of Florence. So back with you in just a few minutes. Have a nice little break.